Could you please state your name, what division you were in, regiment, and when and where you were born, please?
Well, my name is Wellington Francis Homminga. Everybody calls me Bill. I was born in Cadillac, Michigan, April 7th, 1923. Moved down to Cherry Drive off on Welty Street. No, it was off on Cherry Street. When I was about 2 years old. Had tonsillitis. Got on the bus with my mother. Went down into Grand Rapids to Dr. Krupp, who took my tonsils out in his office. Rode the bus back. Was a lady in front of us with a fox fur on. And I got sick to my stomach and completely covered that fox fur with vomit.
Oh no. So you were born in Cadillac, but you were raised in Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
And what division and regiment were you in?
I was in the 32nd Division, 126th Infantry, Company I, 3rd Battalion, and I was a machine gunner. And
Now you started off in the National Guard, and we've done an interview before, so this is a follow-up. So we're going to jump ahead to when you were in California. Can you talk about when you were there at the Cow Palace?
yeah, so we went from Boston, Massachusetts to California, which was the greatest train ride that anybody ever had. I get a little emotional, but
What was the train like? What was it?
it was a
comfort?
Pullman. It was a Pullman, and we had a porter that set the Pullman up every night for us sleeping, and then got in the restroom with us during the day, shot dice, and took our money away from us.
Uh-oh. How was the food?
The food was, as I remember, it was very good. And we had a lot of sandwiches, but we would stop every once in a while, and everybody would get out and go out and buy snacks and this sort of thing. And went through the Rocky Mountains, and we got to San Francisco. And we first stayed at the Army post in San Francisco, and then we were moved out to the Cow Palace.
How long were you at the Army post?
Oh, maybe 3 days, 4 days, and we got out to the Cow Palace.
Now, what was the Cow Palace? Can you describe that?
The Cow Palace was a giant arena lined with bleachers and seats, much like you see downtown when you go to a musical or something like that. You have, well, when you go to the baseball game, it was just all seats. We slept in between the seats.
How long were you there?
We were there 2 weeks. And there was a new housing development across from the Cow Palace. And we would go over and romance the girls. And we met one girl there. Her father was the chief of police of San Francisco. And they had just moved out there from Ayer, Massachusetts. Well, Ayer, Massachusetts was right on the outside of our Army post at Fort Devens. And so we had a little bit in common, and we got real friendly with her and her girlfriends, and we just had a lot of fun.
Okay. Now, at this time, did you have any idea where you were going to be sent to? Did you have any idea?
No, when we went out to Massachusetts, to Fort Devens, we were gonna go to Europe. And the last minute, our orders were changed and we went to San Francisco. We had no idea where we were going. In fact, we didn't even think about where we were going. We really were on an adventure. And one morning they got us up, get your gear together, we're leaving. And they didn't tell us where we were going. We got in the trucks, went down to the pier, and got on the SS Lorelei. And it was a giant luxury ship. Had not been converted over for troops yet. We had our own staterooms. We had dining rooms with dining room tables. We had stewards that waited on us. We had all the food and all the coffee we wanted. And we started out and we sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge. And right after you get under the Golden Gate Bridge, the waters get real rough. And the ship was really rocking. And we had a bunch of seasick soldiers on there. They were sick all over the place. And I didn't get seasick. And the only thing that made me a little bit wheezy was the smell of these other guys that were laying in the corners and on the steps and moaning and groaning.
Wasn't there anything they could take for that?
They didn't have anything for that. No, you just had to gut it out. So we got through the choppy water and got out into the ocean, and then things kind of smoothed out.
And you still didn't have any idea where you were going?
Had no idea where we were going. No. We knew that we were heading into the South Pacific. And we were all alone. We were the only ship out there. Mm-hmm. And we sailed for probably 3 or 4 days. Just the only ship around.
Now you crossed the equator, correct?
Yeah.
And that's the King Neptune ceremony?
That's the King Neptune ceremony.
Were you a part of that?
No. Just before we got to that part, I came down with the German measles. And I was in the hospital with German measles and we crossed the equator. So I missed all of that big celebration. And we used to say those Germans, they wouldn't stop at anything.
Now the German measles were pretty contagious, weren't they?
Yes, they were, yeah. But one morning we woke up and one of the fellows said, "Boy, you ought to go up on deck." We got ships all around us. We went up there and there were ships as far as you could see. Just hundreds of ships. And we were part of a big convoy then. And
how far in was that? How many days into the voyage?
oh, that was probably 7, 8 days into the voyage. And so then we would go up every day and we'd stand on the bow of the ship and we'd watch the porpoises. And the porpoises were always racing with the ship. And then you'd go up in the morning and the deck would be covered with flying fish. They'd come up through the night and they'd land on deck and they'd die there. And so one of the things we did was clean those fish up every morning. So, but
now, did you eat them?
No.
Threw them back?
We threw them back, yeah. So, and so one day we got up and they said we can see land. And so we went up there and you could see off to the north just a little smudging of land. And we said, "What land is that?" And that was the Hawaiian Islands. But we didn't get to Hawaii. and all we ever saw of the Hawaiian Islands was just a little smudge on the horizon. And then a week or so went by, and then they told us, you're going to Australia. And
How long did it take you to get there?
3 weeks.
And where'd you land?
We landed in Adelaide, South Australia.
What did the city look like?
The only thing we saw of the city, we got off the ship and got on trains and went through Adelaide and into the train depot, and from there we got switched around and sent out to a little village called Sandy Creek.
Now, when you first got off the ship, were there any Australians there to greet you? How was the welcoming? Did you meet any of the civilians?
No, we didn't meet anybody. It was at night, and it was in complete secrecy. They didn't want anybody to know that we were there. And, but we knew we were there. And
So you boarded the trains right away and went to Sandy Creek?
went to Sandy Creek.
How long were you there?
We were in Sandy Creek probably 2 months.
Did you do training?
We done training every day. Sandy Creek was, it was sandy, and it was orchards, and it wasn't jungle. It wasn't anything at all like the jungle. And we were there about a week, and though they said they were going to give everybody passes. So we got a pass, went into Adelaide, and we got off the train and went into the train station, and the steps coming up out of the train station were they were in a pyramid up, and there were probably 20, 25 steps up, and they were lined with girls.
Now, was this your first interaction with the Australians?
Yep.
Were they welcoming? Were they friendly?
Well,
How did they take to you?
I'll just tell you how friendly they were. One girl come up to me and she said, "Have you got a date for tonight?" I said, "No, I don't know anybody here." She says, "Well, you got a date now." She says, "You have any friends with you?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got one fellow with me." Says, "He got a date?" "No." Says, "Well, he's got one now." So she got her girlfriend, and I got my buddy, and we went with the girls, and they started taking us all over Adelaide, showing us some. And of course, at night it got dark because it was all black out. And she said, "I want you to come home with me." And I thought, man, I've hit the jackpot. And I said, "Okay, where's home?" Well, home was in Port Noarlunga, South Australia, and we had to take a bus to go there. It was a little town right on the coast, and we got to her place, and then her girlfriend took my buddy, and they took a car, probably a cab or a bus, I can't remember just what, and they went to her house, which was a little further on. And she took me home, introduced me to her mother and the rest of her family. I never did meet her father. I don't know where he was. He might have been in the Australian Army. So. But we stayed there all weekend. And that was my base of operations. Whenever I went into town, I'd get on the bus and head for Port Noarlunga. And so we had a real good time. In fact, Geraldine and I, when we went back to Australia, we went out to Port Noarlunga, and we were looking for Pamela Cunningham. And,
Fantastic. How long was your passes then?
well, they give us a weekend pass.
Okay.
We leave on Friday afternoon and come back late Sunday night.
Okay. And what kind of training were you receiving while you were in the camp?
We had rifle fire, on the rifle range, machine gun range. We would practice throwing hand grenades. We would practice crawling through what underbrush we could find. and waging war against each other, kind of a mock war. And just, in general, just getting used to what it was like to be fighting. So,
Were you getting any jungle warfare tactics?
no, not at that time we weren't. But then, after we left there, we went up the coast of Australia to Brisbane
How'd you get there?
by train. We left the train, on the train in Adelaide, went to Melbourne, and in Australia they have, every state has a different gauge railroad. When we got to Melbourne, we had to transfer everything we had over to another train and take that up to Brisbane.
So you went from Sandy Creek to Adelaide to Melbourne to
Yeah.
Brisbane.
Yeah.
Now, did you spend any period of time at any of these places?
No, we just went through Melbourne, went through Sydney, and then we arrived at Brisbane. Well, this is where the jungle training started.
Okay. What camp did you stay in?
We stayed at Fort Tambourine,
Okay.
and this was an area in the woods on Tambourine Mountain, outside of Brisbane. We got, they picked us up with trucks from the train, where the train dumped us off, and took us out to the campground. The campground was all blue gum trees and jungle. There was nothing there. We made our own camp. We cleared out the brush, put up our tents, and built the roads. And so when we got through with it, we had a real camp there.
Now, to get an idea of the time frame, around what year was this and what month?
This was in about July of 1941.
Okay. And how old were you?
I was 18 then. I was 17 when I joined the National Guards. And I was 18. We had a lot of them 18. We had some of them that were 16. But
Now, for the training, what did they do to help you learn jungle warfare training?
okay, they would take us out sometimes in a late afternoon, and they would give us compass readings to go through this blue gum woods, which really was a jungle. And we would take compass readings, and we'd go so many paces one way and then so many paces another way, and eventually we would get to the end of this system that it worked out, and if you was right, then there was somebody there waiting for you when you come in. If you were wrong, you'd wander all night long in the jungle.
Now, what other things did they have you do? Did they keep you with the artillery training? Were there the same kind of guns? What type of artillery was there?
We didn't have any artillery with us. They didn't give us any artillery training. We just worked with our own guns. We dug foxholes. We went on missions to find a fake enemy, and there would be other troops out there acting as the enemy, and we'd encounter them, and that kind of training. So,
Now, what did it look like out there? Can you give a visual?
well, let's see, how would I describe it?
Coming from Michigan, we don't have
You don't
very
have-
much jungle. We don't have an
you-
idea of what it looked like.
You don't have anything like this, other than up north. You have some, around Baldwin, you have some real pine forests. And if you could visualize taking you out into that pine forest and dumping you off in the middle of it, and you've never been there before, you have no idea where you are or what's in front of you, and they tell you, this is going to be your home. You dig your own wells, You dig your own latrines, you set up your own kitchens, you set up your own tents, and you are a unit on your own by yourself.
What was the weather like in Australia?
At that time, it was winter time. It was fairly cool. By the time we left, it was summertime and it was fairly hot.
What did you have for supplies? What were you wearing? What kind of food were you getting?
We were getting, at Brisbane there, we were getting good rations. We had good food, and they'd send you out during the day, and you'd have sandwiches, and you were pretty well taken care of. And you were fairly comfortable because you didn't really have much to worry about. There was nobody shooting at you, although everybody was shooting blanks. So. But
How long were you there?
we were there until the latter part of October or the 1st of November. And then they put us on ships, and we headed for New Guinea.
Did you know you were going to New Guinea?
We had no idea where we were going.
What type of ships did they put you on?
We were on landing ships. They called them LSTs. They were they were victory ships, really. And we were on the first hold below deck. We slept on steel floors. Immediately below us was a hold full of 500-pound bombs. The deck on top was completely covered with trucks, kitchens, life rafts. On the back we had a 10-ton ship cruiser that was on the back. The Australians were taking that up to patrol the coast of New Guinea. And we had strict orders that we were to stay below deck. We could not sleep up on deck during the night. And one night it was really hot. And I went up on deck. And the life rafts had canvas over them. They were kind of, between the life rafts, they were soft down. And I crawled in to those folds of canvas and slept like a log all night long. I got up the next morning and I come out of there, and the only thing left on the deck of that ship was those two piles of life rafts that I was between. We'd hit a hurricane during the night, and it completely cleaned everything off the deck of the ship.
And it never woke you up?
Never woke me.
Slept right through it. Can sleep
Yeah.
through anything.
Yeah. So.
What happened? Were there people up there looking around by then?
Oh yeah, they were all looking for me, and I met my captain. At that time I was a corporal, and I met my captain, and he said, "Good morning, Private Homminga," and I said, "Good morning, Captain." I knew what had happened. I got broke.
So you went from a corporal to a
To a
private
private.
overnight.
Yeah. So, but I had a good night's sleep.
Well, that's what's important.
Yeah. So
Now, how many days did it take to get to New Guinea?
we were on the ship about 10 days. Crossed the coral reef and pulled into the harbor at Port Moresby, New Guinea, which was full of ships that had been sunk. The Japs had strafed the island and had bombed Port Moresby. The only thing left in Port Moresby was part of a hotel and some buildings that were pretty well wrecked. And they loaded us on trucks and took us out to our camp, which was really on the ocean, and it was called, can't recall right now what they did call that. You remember what that was, hon? When we were up there, we were going to go out there and we didn't.
That's okay. Was it Camp Cable?
No, Camp Cable.
Or Bootless Bay?
No, Camp Cable was actually in Brisbane. That's what we called the camp at, after we got through building it. That was Camp Cable. So. So.
That's okay, we can get back to it if you remembered
Okay,
earlier.
all right.
But you went there on trucks,
Went there
So
on
you-
trucks, they,
unloaded from the ship, went on trucks. Now when you get off the ship, what did you see around you? Were there mountains? Was the jungle like what you had seen in Brisbane?
oh no, this was completely different than Brisbane. This was jungle, and there were mountains there, and there was airfields. And we had our airfield set up, and we went out to this camp. We made our own camp, and the Japs would come over every once in a while and strafe us, and that's where we lost our first casualties. It was a Jap miscalculated bombing the airfield there, and he went over and caught some of our troops, and so we lost a couple, 3 men there. So.
What did you do while you were at this camp? How long were you there?
We were there about 3 weeks, and that's where we really started getting into jungle training. And we had guys out on guard duty at night, and we heard one fellow one night started yelling, "Come on out of that tree, get out of that tree." And then the machine guns were set off, and the next morning, that night we went down there, and you could see this fellow in the tree. He was laying right on the trunk, right on the branch of the tree, but we couldn't get him out of there. And they shot and shot and shot. And he just laid there, so we figured he was dead. Well, the next morning we went back down there to see if we could get him out of there. Well, there wasn't anybody in the tree. That was just a part of that branch there, and in the night it looked like a man laying there, but it was full of lead.
Yep. Now how did you know the Japanese were in the trees?
Well, they told us when we went in there that the Japanese would climb trees and shoot at you from up in the trees.
Did the American or Australian soldiers tell you that?
It was the Americans that told us that. So.
Now have you had much contact with the Australians? Have you been doing any training with them? Have you talked to the soldiers at all?
No. We never saw any Australians at all while we were up there. We didn't even know they were in there. And they were there, but we didn't know it. And one morning we got up, and the troops from E Company, I think it was, were walking by us, full packs, and we said, "Where are they going?" He said, "Well, they're going over the mountains." And so they left, and then a few days later they loaded us on airplanes, and we flew over the mountains to a little trail, and then they dumped us off, and they said, "Now you're going over the mountains."
Before we get that far, you were talking about the jungle training though, and you said you really got into it there.
Yeah.
Can you describe that? What was different than Brisbane?
Well, in Brisbane, after you'd been in the woods there for a while, you kind of got used to it, and you pretty well knew where you were, and there was no apprehension at all. But in the jungles up in New Guinea there, you'd walk in the jungle and you immediately didn't know where you were. The only thing you had to go by was compass headings, and you had to follow the guy that was in front of you. And you would wander in the jungles for hours and hours, never knowing where you were.
What were you going through? What did it look like?
It looked,
What kind of vegetation were you seeing? Did you see any wild animals?
no, you never saw any wild animals. All the activity scared them away. So, we did see one snake. It was a rock python, and he was probably 15 foot long, and he got away. We didn't bother him much, but we didn't see any birds, we didn't see any animals. Everything got squared away. We did see a lot of natives. The natives would come through and they'd stop and bargain with us, and they had things to bargain with, and where they got them I have no idea, but they did. And so one of the nurses, this is a story I've told a lot, but one of the nurses in Port Moresby gave the native woman a brassiere to see what she'd do with it. And she left. She come back the next day and she had the brassiere tied around her stomach here, and she had the pockets filled with little things to sell.
She didn't quite understand the use of it,
No.
but she made good use out of it.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
Were you able to talk to the natives at all? Did you have any interaction with them?
you could talk to them, and they would, by sign language, they'd tell you what they wanted, and by sign language you could tell them what you wanted. And we used to go swimming down by the ocean. There was a big stream that emptied into the ocean, and we'd go swimming down there. One day we were swimming and the natives come through, and boy, they really got excited about swimming in there. They were trying to tell us to get out of there, and we didn't know why. And so one of them took me upstream a little ways and come around the corner, and then I knew why. The stream was full of saltwater crocodiles.
How far away were you swimming from them?
Probably 200 yards.
It's a good reason to get out of there.
Yeah, there was a rocky kind of a dam that was there, and they were behind that. And so, but we didn't go down swimming there anymore. So
Now, while you're doing this training and walking through and meeting the natives, are there trails? I've heard of kunai grass. Were you encountering any of this? What is that?
we didn't encounter much kunai grass in Port Moresby. We got that when we got over into Buna.
Okay.
And they put us off on this trail. It's a Papandetta trail. And
Now, this is after you flew up the
yeah,
mountains.
yeah.
How long did that flight take?
As I remember it, it was probably not more than 40 minutes.
And you landed on an airstrip?
No, we landed right in the middle of a kunai grass field. But the natives had been in there and had prepared that so that we could land there.
Okay.
And it was called the Papandetta Pangani Trail. And the little village we landed by was Pangani. And we never did see that village, but we got on the trail.
So you got right off the trail. You didn't camp overnight. There was
No.
nothing there.
No, we got off the plains, got on the trail, and by that time it was probably about noon, and we started out walking.
Now, what kind of packs did you have? What kind of uniforms did you have on? What did you have for supplies?
We had khaki uniforms, we had full field packs, we had helmets, we had all of our ammunition we were carrying, and our guns, and our rations, and each man had one sock of rice, a GI sock of rice, and a can of corned beef. And once a day at night, we would stop and we'd get enough rice for the squad and one can of corned beef, and make corned beef and rice, and that's what we had to eat. So, and then during the day we had what we call sea rations, and that would be we'd open up one can and there would be a candy bar in there, or there was some instant coffee, but we never made coffee. We'd open the instant coffee pack and you chew the coffee. And
Why was that?
well, you had to have hot water to make coffee, and we didn't have any hot water. And the water we had was in our canteens, and we needed that to drink. We didn't need it to make coffee with, so we'd chew the coffee, and that gives you a pretty good jolt. So,
Okay.
yeah, so
Now, what did the trail look like? Was it pre-cut? Were you making your way through the jungle?
the trail was a trail that was made by the natives as a thing to travel on between the cities of Papandetta and Pangani. And they traveled it all the time. And so it was probably, as I remember it, in places it was 3-4 feet wide. Other places it would open up into fields and it'd be a couple feet wide. So, and
Did you know where you were going yet?
no, we had no idea.
Did you know you were going into combat?
We knew we were going into combat, but we didn't know when we were going to get there, and we didn't know anything about the area that we were going to.
How long did it take you?
It was 13 days.
Could you hear battle sounds as you were getting closer?
There was no battle sounds, there was no fighting, there was no Japs for the full 13 days. We were just walking.
How did you know when you got to where you were going, and where was that?
When we got to where we were going, it was outside of a village called Papandetta, and it was a trail that run into a road, and all the other troops that had come originally, had started out, come over, they were there, and some of the other troops that had been coming in from other areas, they all met there.
All American troops?
All American troops, except there were some Australians at that time. We did start to run into Australian troops then, so. And
Did you guys get along well together?
yeah, we never had any big problems with them, and they didn't have any big problems with us. Of course, when you're in battle, you don't have time for problems between individuals. You're all fighting for one thing. So.
Were you guys able to give each other tips or spend any time together, talking,
No.
getting to know each other?
No, we come into this area one night, or one afternoon. The Australians had a Jap there that they had captured. We went up and gathered around him. We'd never seen a Jap before. So we gathered around him, and they shot him and buried him. And then the next morning we started out for the jungle. And this is where we really got into the jungle. This was in the swamps. And we were in swamp water from our knees. The depths run all the way from our knees clear up to our chest. And we were in that for 3-4 days at a crack.
Were there animals in that? Fish?
Never saw any.
Anything?
Never saw any. And I think that the reason we didn't see any is because we just made so much racket that scared them off. So
Probably a good thing in a way.
yeah.
How long did you have to wade through the swamps?
That first swamp we went through, we were in there in about 3 days.
Where'd you sleep?
We slept wherever we could. I crawled up on the roots of a mangrove tree, and I had one root under my ankles, one root under my knees, one root under the small of my back, and one root under my shoulders, and I slept like that all night long. And the other guys, they did much the same thing.
How'd you guys eat?
We didn't. You couldn't eat because there was no place to stop and prepare food. Once in a while, you'd open up a can of sea rations and take a little bit of cookie or cracker or whatever was in there and get you through. But we had plenty of water. We drank the swamp water. We filled our canteens, and we had chlorine tablets and put them in there, and that would purify the water. So we had all the water we wanted to drink.
It didn't taste as bad then if you put the chlorine?
No, you could taste the chlorine, but you couldn't taste the brackish of the water. So, and but we started that out, and we probably were in the swamps there the better part of a week.
Did you still have your full pack on?
Oh yes, yeah. Whenever you could, you would unpack your pack and spread your shelter half out and the blanket and sleep under that on the ground at night.
Now after the swamps, did you have any interactions with the Japanese then? Was there any fighting?
We started while we were in the swamps. We started running into them. And they would shell us with mortar fire and artillery fire. And we'd keep moving around. And we were in this one field one day. And I had just taken off my putts, my shoes and socks. So I hadn't had them off in weeks. And was kind of doing some maintenance work on my feet, and we started getting shelled by mortars. And so we grabbed our stuff and run barefoot through the grass until we got to a place where I could stop and put the shoes and socks back on again. So
What was wrong with your feet?
we had jungle rot.
What's that?
Jungle rot is when you don't take your shoes and socks off and you wade in water all the time. You get disease in there, and it starts to rot your skin off. And when you take your shoes and socks off, your skin comes right with it.
That must have been hard to wade through the swamps with your feet in that condition.
It was extremely difficult. Yeah, but you had no place else to go. You had to do it. So, and then we went from there. We went to a staging area that where all of our troops got together. We probably had a couple hundred troops in this one staging area, and we were there 3 or 4 days. Went out on patrol several times, run into the Japs, and killed a few of them, and they killed a few of our men. And
Were you able to take any prisoner?
we never took prisoners. And a lot of people don't understand that when you're up there, if you take a prisoner, it takes 5 men to watch it, and you don't have the men. And so if you do have a prisoner, at that time, you kill him. And sounds kind of,
You have to have soldiers to fight a war.
yeah. It sounds kind of heartless, but you have to do what you have to do. And
Now, were you able to have a camp up there and set up tents finally? Were you out of the swamps so you could...
never set up tents. You were out in the open all the time, and you were in the swamps all the time. We finally drove into a spot they called the San Fernando Road, and that was a road between Papandetta and Buna. And our mission was to capture Buna. Well, we drove into the San Fernando Road, and it was right in the middle of a Jap hospital. And we flushed all of the Japs out of there, killed a bunch of them, and we set up our area there. It was, you all right?
Excuse me.
It was an area about 200 yards long, maybe 100 yards wide. And we were there for 21 days. And we were a roadblock. We were behind the Japanese lines. And we were a roadblock. And we were stopping the Japs from using the San Fernando Road for supplies.
So, did you have a lot... Were you running into the Japanese a lot at that point?
Yes, quite a lot. So they would come through our lines at night. And they never got very far, but they would try it.
But you were staying stationary at this time. You
We were
weren't...
stationary. We were the group that stopped them from using that road for transportation and supplies and that sort of thing. So, and one day we were on one end of the block and looked down at the other end, and there was a Jap sitting there in the middle of the road. All he had on was a pair of undershorts. And he was just sitting there. Well, they killed him. And a couple of nights later, I was laying in my foxhole, and it was a head and pair of shoulders coming in the moonlight. There was another Jap. All he had on was a pair of undershorts. we killed him. So, but I never figured it out until just a few years ago. I think they were trying to give up. I think they were trying to get us to take him prisoner, so, but we couldn't do it. One morning we woke up and there were probably 300 natives in our area. We never heard them come in at night. They never made a sound, but they were from Buna. And the Japs had taken their village and they moved them out of there. So they come in and the next morning they left and went to Papandetta.
Now, were all the natives friendly?
They were very friendly, very friendly. The Australians had a contract with the natives that for every Japanese head they brought in, they give them $5. They brought in so many heads that finally they had to say, well, you just bring us 2 ears and we'll give you $5. So they would cut their ears off. And so they knew that we were there to protect them. So.
Now, were there any headhunting tribes there?
Yeah.
Did you run into those?
Yeah, we run into those up in the mountains as we were coming in from Pangani, and an Australian had a group of them going back to pick up supplies, and they had two looked like carrots coming down their back. They had their hair done up in yellow strips of bark wrapped around it, and it looked like 2 long carrots there. And we had one fellow with us, Frank Salufo. He had 2 gold teeth right in front. And they spotted these gold teeth. And they'd do anything to make him laugh. And then they get down and look at those teeth. Finally, the Australian came over and said to him, he said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Says, what? Says, make them laugh so that you can show them your teeth. Says, these are headhunters, and we don't know how much they've been converted. So Frank didn't laugh. He didn't laugh anymore. No.
My.
Yeah,
Now, back on the trail before you went into Buna, you said you were there for 21 days?
Mm-hmm.
Then where did you go from there?
Well, on the 21st day, the Australians come up and relieved us. And then they took us back to the staging area where we had originally started and fed us. We had hot rice, corned beef, and of course we hadn't eaten anything in 21 days. And everything we ate, we threw up. And the next morning I went to the first aid tent and they took my temperature. I had a fever of 100, I think it was 104. And the guy said, how long have you had this fever? I said, I don't really know. I said, I've been sick for 2 or 3 weeks. And he said, well, you've got a bad case of malaria. And so we're going to send you back. So they loaded me on a plane and shipped me back to Port Moresby.
Now, can you explain what malaria is?
Malaria is a disease that is transmitted by the mosquito, the Anopheles mosquito. And it gets in your system and settles in your liver and in your kidneys. And you get an extremely high fever and you have chills. You start shaking and you can shake a bed right across the floor and shake that hard. And it takes about 15 days of intense treatment to get over this. But you always have the bug in your system. I have the bug in my system right now, but it's dormant. And I can't give blood for blood transfusions because if I do, then the people that I give it to will get malaria. So, but it's an extremely disabling disease, and everybody had it up there. Some worse than others. So.
Now, wasn't there anything they could give you for that? Any medicines?
Yeah, they give us quinine and Adabrin. And quinine is an old remedy that keeps it under control. Atabrine, it was a new one then, and if you take enough of it, it turns your complexion yellow. Well, we had a lot of yellow people up there that weren't Japs. So, but we ran out of quinine, we ran out of Atabrine,
And you said almost everybody had malaria?
about 100%, yeah.
That had to have affected the fighting, the conditions.
Oh, it did, it did. It took more troops out of commission than injuries. So it was a virulent disease.
Now, as soon as you started getting the shakes, were you able to go back to the med station?
Well, as soon as I got the shakes, I'd just lay there and shake. And there wasn't anything you could do in it. You just lay there and shake, and it took probably 2-3 hours, and eventually you'd calm down a little bit. So,
You didn't go back to the med station? They weren't sending people back as soon as they got
Yes.
malaria?
well, if you could get to a med station, they would. But we'd been up there for 21 days. We couldn't get out of there. We were surrounded. And so we had to stay right there. So, but as soon as we got back to med station, then they started picking out the people that had the worst cases of it and sending those back to the hospital. So
Did they have a certain temperature you had to be able to go back?
you had to have 104 temperature for 5 consecutive days before they would send you back.
Now, before you went to Buna, they sent you back to Port Moresby?
Yeah.
How did you get there?
By plane. We had a landing strip by Papandetta, and they would send the planes in there, and we'd load up, and they'd send us back. So.
Did you go to the hospital in Port Moresby, or did they
Yep.
send you to Australia?
No, I went in Port Moresby. I was in the hospital, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed there, and a nurse come by, and she said, "What stinks?" I said, "Well, that's probably me." I said, "I haven't had a bath in a month." So they got me some towels and soap, and I took a shower, and then I felt a lot better. But I was there for about a week, and they loaded me on an A-20, which is a combat bomber, along with some other people, and they flew us to Townsville, Australia.
Back to the hospital. What did you do for the week in the hospital?
Laid there and got treated, and tried to get my strength back.
Were you able to eat more food now? Were they giving you?
Yeah, I could eat more food, and everything tasted extremely good. So,
What kind of food were they giving you?
well, they would give you corned beef, rice, squash, all of the regular things. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, so it was a regular diet. So I did wake up one night, and I was about 2 miles from the hospital. I'd been walking in my sleep, and I was right in the middle of an ammunition dump, and we were in the middle of an air raid. But I just lost my bearings, and I really didn't know where I was. So
You were sleepwalking?
I was sleepwalking, yeah.
What'd you do?
Well, there was a guard come by, and he said, "What in the world are you doing out here?" And I said, "I don't know. I was in the hospital."
Were you in a hospital gown?
Yeah. Actually, I was in pajamas. I didn't even have a hospital gown on. No. I was in pajamas, and I was barefoot.
No gun, no nothing?
No nothing, no.
And there was a raid going on, an air raid?
Air raid going on, yeah.
So did the guard bring you back? Did you point you in the right
He
direction?
took me to the guard shack, and they called an ambulance, and the ambulance come, and they took me back to the hospital. And the nurse says, "Where in the world have you been?" "We've been looking all over for you."
You snuck away on them.
Yeah, so,
And so then you went to Townsville, you said, in Australia?
yeah.
You took the bomber over?
Yeah, took a bomber over there.
How long did the flight take?
You know, as I remember it, it probably was maybe a couple hours, but maybe it wasn't even that long. And I know we flew extremely low, because they wanted to keep away from the Japanese airplanes. And I was in the nose of the bomber, and we flew so low over the ocean that the water would slosh up on the nose of the ship. So I thought we was going under several times, but we didn't. So we got over to Townsville, and they loaded us on the trains. We eventually wound up back in Brisbane. And I was in the hospital in Brisbane,
Still for malaria?
still from malaria, yeah.
Was your fever still high?
Fever was still high, but in the process, I developed sores on my back, from my waist to my neck, and my full back was just hundreds of sores on it.
When did you start getting that?
I started getting that just before we left the roadblock. I started itching and scratching, and by the time I got to Port Moresby, my back was, just a mass of running sores.
Was that why they sent you to Australia?
Yeah, that was the big reason they sent me back there.
What kind of sores were they? A cut, a scratch?
No, they were round sores, and nobody seemed to know what they were.
Kind of like spider bites? Like those?
Kind of like that, yeah. But there were just hundreds of them there. And I got to Brisbane, and I got a hold of a doctor there, and he looked me all over. He sent me into town, and they took a biopsy out of my side here. And they examined it, and he said, we figured out what you got. I said, what's that? He says, you've got a larva in there, like similar to the dog and cat tapeworm in the southern part of the United States. And it's laying eggs. And every time it lays an egg, the eggs hatch, and they start a new sore. So you've got all of these sores are actually larvae of the dog and cat tapeworm in there. Okay, so I said, well, now what do we do now? He says, we're going to freeze them. I said, how are you going to freeze them? He said, let me show you. So he had a can about this high with a jet spray nozzle on the top. And he says, at first this is going to be real painful. But he says, just grit your teeth and we'll get it. So they would shoot this spray in there, and the minute the spray hit, it would freeze. And they froze my whole back twice a day.
That must have been painful.
It was.
Now, did it hurt when you had the sores, though?
Oh yeah, man, I couldn't sleep at night. I'd have to take drugs to put me to sleep.
Now, when you were in the jungle, that must have made it especially hard to move around.
Well, it was difficult to move around, but you didn't move around much at night anyway. You laid in your foxhole.
Didn't you have a pack on your back and carrying your rifle slung
No.
around your shoulder?
Well, no, I had a pistol, and our packs were, we had unpacked our packs, and we had those in our foxhole. But it was raining all the time, and our foxholes are full of water, and so we'd be laying in water all night long, and you get out in the morning and try and dry off. So,
Did the freezing work? Did it get rid of the larva?
got rid of them. Yep.
How long did that take?
Took me 2 weeks.
2 weeks, getting frozen twice a day.
Yep.
Did it hurt as bad every time they did it?
No, it got so that I got used to it.
Okay.
But one of the fringe benefits was that I got a can of that spray, and it would shoot a spray about 10, 15 foot long. And when the nurse goes by, you could shoot her right in the leg with it.
You didn't shoot the
Yeah.
nurses in the
Oh, yeah.
legs.
Oh yeah. And she'd scream, Homminga.
It's no wonder they even treated you.
No. You had to do things to kind of liven life up a little bit.
What else did you do while you were in the hospital? Were you guys able to play cards, throw some dice?
We could play cards. The Red Cross had a hut there where they sold cigarettes out of it to the troops, and I ran that store one day when she went into town, and all the cigarettes had signs on it that was donated by the VFW, and so we gave the cigarettes away. When she come back, she didn't have any cigarettes left. But
Oh no.
she didn't ask me to run the store again.
Just one second, let me change the tape. Back in the hospital where you're shooting nurses with freeze spray.
Yeah.
You said you were there for how many weeks?
I was there for probably a month.
Okay.
And then one morning they got a hold of me after we got my back cleared up. Said, we're sending you to Coolangatta.
Where was that?
Coolangatta was outside of Brisbane on the coast. And I had no idea where it was or what it was. And it was a little bitty village. And they had a rest camp on the outskirts of Coolangatta. And we could go, when we went there, we could go swimming in the ocean and lay around and just kind of recover.
Now who's we? Who are you with?
These are all troops that are getting rested up.
All from the Red Arrow Division?
All from the Red Arrow Division, yeah. And we was there swimming one day. There was a reef off the coast a little ways, maybe 200 yards. And we'd go out and the waves would break over that reef and then you could body surf the waves back in. And we were having a whale of a time. And one day I went up on a little hill that was above it with a pair of binoculars and looked out. I was looking for whales because we'd seen quite a few whales going by. I was looking for them and I pulled down with my binoculars and looked just beyond the reef and it was full of sharks. They couldn't get in because they couldn't get over the reef. Well, that kind of cut down on our swimming a little bit. So.
I bet it would.
So, but then at night we'd walk into Coolangatta and try to find some girls for romance and raise a little cane. And Geraldine and I were back there a few years ago. Coolangatta is now known as the Gold Coast. And it's completely populated and all kinds of motels, hotels, gambling casinos, and that sort of thing there. And
When you were there, what was there?
just beach, a few little houses. You could buy lots there for $25 an acre. We should have bought them.
Should have bought them.
So,
Cheap real estate.
yeah. Then they.
Was there a camp that you were staying at the rest and
We
relaxation?
were back at Camp Cable.
Okay.
That's where the troops went back to.
Okay.
And so after I got through at Coolangatta, they sent me back to my outfit at Camp Cable. And we were there a couple of weeks and they said, we're going to Newcastle. Well, we've been to Newcastle before. It's a town right on the ocean. And we're going to Newcastle and we're going to train for beach landings. And I laid in my tent there the first night and come down and attacked the malaria. And they put me in the Navy hospital there. And from there they sent me to a hospital in Sydney.
So you didn't participate in the beach training at all?
I didn't participate in any beach landings
The
at all.
first night you got malaria again?
And so then
How'd they send you back to Sydney? Did you go by train, truck?
went by truck from Newcastle to an airfield, and from the airfield they flew us into Sydney. And we had a hospital in Sydney, and it was full.
Was your fever really high again?
Yeah,
The same symptoms?
It was up 103, 104.
What was the common temperature?
Common temperature was 98.
Well, for men suffering from malaria, the soldiers.
104 to 105 in that area. So, and sweat, high fever, shakes. So, and I was in Sydney for about a month, and they said, we're going to send you back to the States.
What'd you do in Sydney for the month? Were you in the hospital the whole time?
Lay in the hospital, going to town.
You were able to leave the
Oh
hospital
yeah,
this
I
time
could
then?
leave the hospital and go into town. And raised Cain, so. So it was, I had a good time in Sydney, so. And
Now, how'd they treat your malaria when you were in the hospital? What'd they give you, any?
they give me Atabrun, and they quit giving us quinine. They just put us on a strict ration of Atabrun.
So your skin was turning yellow?
Oh, yeah, everybody was yellow. So it was a universal condition.
Now, were the Australians in Australia suffering from malaria at all?
The troops that were up in New Guinea and exposed to those mosquitoes up there, yeah, they had malaria. And they probably had as much trouble with malaria as we did. So, but we didn't get acquainted with the Australians in the hospitals there. We weren't in their hospital. We were in our own hospitals. And so they.
Did they let you go out on the weekends? They didn't make you stay in the hospital bed the whole time?
Oh no! If you were ambulatory, you could get up and walk around. They let you in town on a pass.
So it was just kind of a recovery center?
That's just about what it was. Yeah, it's just about what it was. So.
What kind of food were you getting there? More hash?
Well, they had good food. They had a lot of steaks, and hamburgers, and potatoes. It was good food. Yeah.
Now, had you lost a lot of weight when you were in New Guinea?
Yeah, when I went up there, I was about 100 and, I'd say maybe 180 pounds. When I come out of there, I was 106. So.
How long were you in New Guinea?
And we were in New Guinea from the latter part of October until the 1st of January. We celebrated Christmas up on the lines.
How'd you do that? What'd you guys do?
We just said Merry Christmas to each other and went out and started fighting and shooting.
What'd you do after the hospital? Your fever was still high?
Fever was still high, and in Sydney they got the fever down, and they said, well, we're going to send you back to the States. So they shipped me on a train. I went back to Brisbane and got on the SS Mauritania, which was a sister ship to the Loreline, the one I came over on. And
Was it as nice?
no, it was not as nice. All of the staterooms have been converted over for troops, and you had stacked bunks, and so it was nice, but it wasn't near as nice as when we went over.
Did you get seasick that time?
No, I did not. No, and I watched one guy on ship there. He was a sailor. He was making a hammock, and I said to him, I said, I think I can do that. He says, you can. He says, it's simple. I watched him and watched him and watched him, and I scrounged around and found some real heavy string, and I made my own hammock, and I slept up on deck quite a few nights in my own hammock there.
How long did that take you to make?
It only took me about 2 hours.
Not bad.
No.
Not for a good bed?
Yeah, it was a good bed, yeah. So.
How did it take as long to get back to the United States as it took to get to Australia?
As I remember it, it took about 2 weeks, and we landed in Panama, and we took the Panama Canal and went up to the Atlantic side, and then they docked and said, we're not going to go any further because there's too many German subs in the Gulf of Mexico.
Where'd you dock?
We docked on the Atlantic side of the Panama Canal at Panama City. So they unloaded us. We went in the hospital there, stayed there for 3 weeks.
Were you still suffering from malaria?
Occasionally, yeah. Occasionally I'd have that.
Now, did it hit others as bad as it hit you?
No, it didn't. I had it really, really hard. And there were others that was as bad as I was, but there wasn't a whole lot of them. So, but everybody had a tinge of it. So, some people were able to cope with it a lot better than others. So.
For the 3 weeks in the hospital there, was it the same thing? Did you get to play cards with the guys?
Yeah,
go out
we
on
played pinochle.
passes?
We played pinochle. We couldn't go out on pass, but they would take us on tours so that we could see the various tourist attractions around there. And we'd take a little train from the Atlantic side of the Panama over to the Pacific side. And they'd take us to different churches they had there. One was the Church of the Golden Altar, and it had, it was all locked up, but you could look through the bars and see the inside. They had an altar there that was made of solid gold. They had pillars holding the church up, and in a design they had gold coins in these pillars. They had gold coins embedded in the floor. So,
Sounds beautiful.
yeah, it is. Yeah, it was. It was really beautiful.
Who were you with? Various American troops at this time, not
Oh,
just
yeah.
the 32nd?
Yeah, we wasn't with the 32nd, no. They're just various troops. Then they loaded us on a ship and they took us back through the canal. And we went up to San Francisco. We landed one dock away from the dock we left on.
Left on the sister ship and landed almost right next to it once again.
That's right, that's right.
Start to finish.
Yep. And then we were in Letterman General Hospital there.
Well, when you got off the ship, were there people there to greet you?
Yeah, there was. It was quite a celebration. And we, of course, they loaded us on ambulances. And there's all kinds of people around there just waving and cheering and everything. And then we went out to Letterman General Hospital. And we were there about 3-4 days. And then they sent me to Waco, Texas. Well, actually Temple, Texas, which is just a little beyond Waco. And I went in the hospital there and stayed there. And then from there I went home for Christmas and went back.
How'd you get home to Christmas? Take a train?
Took a train, yeah. So, and that's when I found out how big Texas is. Took us a whole day to get out of Texas on the train. It took us less than a day to get to Michigan. So, but
When you got home for the first time, how long had it been since you've seen your family?
3 years. About 3 years, 6 months.
Wow.
And,
Did they know you were coming?
They kind of thought I might be, but they didn't know for sure. Didn't know when I was going to get there. And I got there in the morning, real early. And walked into the bedroom and got him up. I said, "You going to sleep all day?"
So you went back home to your parents and walked in.
Oh, yeah. So,
What was their reactions when they first seen you?
oh, they were real excited and told me how worried they'd been and how glad they were to have me home. And my dad got up and ate breakfast and went to work.
Any brothers and sisters?
I had 3 sisters and 3 brothers.
Were they there to greet you?
Yep, they were all upstairs.
Were you the oldest?
Jean was the oldest. She was probably 2-3 years younger than me. And then Mary was a couple of years younger than her. Bonnie was younger than that. Then Tony, Mike, and Tim were all born after I went in the Army. So they, well, actually there was only Tony and Mike. Tim was born after I got home, that's right.
So you never met your 2 younger brothers yet?
No, no. When I left the service when my mother was pregnant for Tony, but I had never met him, so.
So you got to see your parents, your sisters, and you got to meet your baby brothers for the
Yep.
first time.
Yep.
Were you able to stay home, or did you have to go back to Texas again?
I had to go back to Texas. I was home for 2 weeks,
Okay.
and then I had to go back to Texas.
Was your malaria under control by then?
I thought it was, and I went to a rehab center down there in Waco, Texas, and then they assigned me to the 99th Division up in Paris, Texas, and I was in Company A, 393rd Infantry. And I got there, but my clothes didn't get there. And so the first sergeant, he really got on me about that, and I said, I can't help it, because my clothes aren't here. So I was there about 2 weeks on KP, and one day...
What is KP?
Kitchen police. So, and one day, one of the fellows come up and said, your clothes are in. I said, okay. The next morning they had reveille, and I heard him, the first sergeant say, where's Homminga? Said he's still in bed upstairs. So he come bounding up the stairs and grabbed my bunk and shook it. I was on the top bunk. I rolled out right on top of him. And he says, how come you're not in reveille? I said, I don't have my clothes. He says, they came in yesterday. I says, I know, but they're down at the depot. How am I supposed to get them? He didn't give me a truck or anything to go get them with. So then they gave me a truck, and we went down and got my clothes. And the captain had me in his office, and he was just back from the South Pacific. Can't remember what island he was on, but anyway, him and I were the only two that had seen any action. And he says, you don't get along with the first sergeant very well, do you? And I said, no, I don't. He said, he's a little power hungry. He said, well, just play along with him. He said, I've got you all set up for a training cadre. And when these troops move out, he says, you'll go into a training cadre. And I said, okay. And the next day I come down with another attack of malaria. Went back in the hospital. And in the meantime, I had made an application for the Air Corps. Thought if I could get transferred out of the infantry and into the Air Corps, it'd be a little better life. And
Now, if you transferred in the Air Corps, would you stay in the United States, or then would you have to go back overseas again?
I'd have to go back overseas.
So you were planning on that?
Yeah. So, and I went through the hospital, and the captain had my case. He come in one day. He says, "Well, I've got two papers here." He says, "One is your transfer to the Air Corps, and one is a discharge. Which one do you want?"
Hard choice. And which one did you choose?
Give me that discharge.
So you were able to go home?
Yep.
Where were you at when that happened?
That was in Paris, Texas.
Still in Paris?
Yeah.
So you were able to go home right away? How long did you have to wait to be able to go home?
24 hours.
24 hours? How'd you get home?
I took a bus from Paris, Texas to Texarkana, Texas. Took a train from Texarkana to Grand Rapids.
And when you got home, was your family waiting for you? Did they know you were coming home this time?
No.
Just walked home and surprised them again?
Yeah, surprised me again. Then right after that, I met Geraldine. Met her in, was it April?
May.
May? Met her in May. Made a date with her. Picked her up on the corner of Division, or Monroe, and Bridge Street, at the hotel there. We went out on Reed's Lake, went in a canoe, come back, went up on Lookout Mountain, and I proposed to her.
That day?
Yep.
On the first date?
First date, yep. So we got married in September.
Congratulations. Wow. And you've been married ever since.
Yeah.
How many years have you been married now?
60.
He'll be 61.
Fantastic.
September.
Well, thank you for doing this interview with me.
It's okay.
Before we finish, is there anything else? I have one more question. Overall, how did your experience in the Red Arrow Division affect your life?
I've thought about it every day. I've dreamed about it. and I probably will until the day I die.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, sir.
It's okay.
My life is quite a bit better because of what you and the other soldiers did, so thank you.
We're glad we can have people like you around.
Thank you, sir.